Hi everyone and welcome back to That UFO Podcast. My name is Andy and it's another night in the shed, which means it's another UFO news update. Very quickly, I'm going to ask everyone who's bought the book, thank you so much. If you could leave me an Amazon review, that would be greatly appreciated. Or any site you've bought it from, if you can leave a review of the book Atlas of UFOs over my shoulder there, if you're watching on YouTube, appreciate it. I'll remind you that again at the end because a lot of you are here to listen to the UFO news and not me blabber on. And there's loads of stuff to get through actually from the last couple of days. October's kind of kicked off with a lot of stuff. Some good news, some not so good news. Other news you'll have to make up your own mind. We're going to kick off though with Dylan Borland, the whistleblower who came forward at the recent hearings. He was of course on with Jeremy Corbell and George Knapp over the last two episodes of Weaponized, part 1 and part 2. Really enjoyed this, so I'm going to read you through some of the main comments and then play a little clip of Dylan Borland himself speaking on Weaponized around his thoughts of what he thinks this phenomenon is. As always, folks, disclaimer, please go and watch Jeremy and George's interview with Dylan himself if you get the chance, if you get the time. I often listen on audio. These I like to watch on video as well because I think the body language can tell quite a lot from these sorts of things too. And Dylan Borland's a really interesting guy and he said a lot of really interesting things. But some of the highlights for me, folks, so Corbell tells you at the start of part 1 and part 2 that some parts of the interview are censored pending clearance. You'll hear some beeps now and again. A lot of things quite often it'll be like, I was talking to beep, redacted name, but you can understand why. So we see it's part 1 for part 1, recorded back in March 2025, and I think this was the case that if he didn't get to speak to Congress, this is how this was going to come out potentially. He's been talking to Knapp and Corbell for a couple of years. So Dylan Borland said he was going to Congress before Arrow. He reached out to Knapp and Corbell, and he was part of a group coming forward before David Grush, so before 2023. He said they went through the full whistleblower process. Dylan Borland talks about, I'll call him Dylan, I'll call him Borland, I've just got the way my notes are written, sorry folks. Dylan Borland talks about the programme he was part of that worked with drones. Had many colleagues and friends of his commit suicide, which is tragic. Psychologists and other professionals were also brought in to help, just given the nature of what his actual job was. He talked about some things he has done being good and honourable, other things not so much. And it really sounds like the difference between helping his fellow soldiers in difficult situations with drone support. Other times it may be someone being taken out who morally they don't agree with. Dylan didn't pull the triggers, but helped get to a decision, and that's of course very difficult work. And it sort of reminded me of a lot of those kind of war films I've watched, especially in recent years. I can't remember which one it was. It may have been the kind of one of the Hunt for Bin Laden type ones. The one with Jessica Chastain, and you get those scenes where they're looking at a compound and they can see children walking about and families and innocent people, and it's a case of, do we go ahead, do we not? Well, we want to hit the target, but we're going to potentially kill civilians here. Very difficult job. Not one I want to go into too much detail on, of course. I don't know myself and I've never been in that position, thank God. But it sounds like that may have been some of the type of work Dylan Borland perhaps was alluding to having to be involved in. Borland again shared his sighting that he talked about at the hearing recently. 3 blocks from him, as he was having a cigarette late one night, came from the NASA hangar 3 blocks away. He sees a white light pop up. He thinks it's a weather balloon test. It's the NASA hangar. He's used to kind of seeing stuff. He walks towards the flight line of the object. The light flies towards him where he gets to a point he can see a 150-foot equilateral triangle, black metallic paint, like a really expensive paint with a light glistening underneath. He said the skin of the aircraft on the outside had a yellow translucent glow, like cloud going around it. A really interesting description, not uncommon from some of these types of sightings. Really interesting detail. He says his phone got really hot and shut down. He initially suspected it was quote unquote ours, and was on the base. Says since then, with the things he knows, that he doesn't think it's ours. The whole event lasted 3 to 5 minutes. No sound, no hovering, just pulsating. I'll give you a quote here just from the end of that part 1. I have direct first-hand knowledge and exposure of crash recovery, reverse engineering, and integration of technology into, redacted, and the most important piece of technology which isn't the craft itself. Corbell asks him, is this the power source? And Dylan Borland says, you can make that assertion. So Dylan Borland, you see through part 1 and part 2, and he talks about this in the hearing, is still wrestling with what he can and can't say from an official point of view. He doesn't want to get into trouble, and I'm going to go into part 2 now in a moment. And you hear about some of that trouble and some of the things that he and other whistleblowers have to wrestle with just to come forward and have these conversations. I've said before, folks, this is just my opinion, which is a bit of a cop-out. But if you're sitting there thinking these people just have to come forward and tell us everything, one, that doesn't always make the biggest difference. And two, they get into so much bother in ways that you can't imagine, that you wouldn't get into trouble in your own job having types of conversations like this. So yeah, really interesting him talking about the most important piece of technology isn't the craft, but the power source more than likely, which makes sense. Part 2, which just came out in the last couple of days, was the truth about legacy UFO programs. So I watched this again today, folks, so this one's fresher in my mind. I've picked out some of the key call-outs. He says he started talking about how Arrow classify everything he wanted to talk about. He gave an analogy here, and I can see folks even in the podcast Discord, wonderful place. If you sign up on Patreon and Apple, you get access to it. Really good bunch of folks in there. I don't like to tell them that often, though. But I can see them discussing this. Basically, Dylan Borland mentions that if I see Bigfoot at a Starbucks in a US Army Air Force uniform, and I submit that to Arrow with the testimony, with the drawing and all, they'll say, well, Starbucks is unclassified, but the Bigfoot stuff is all top secret, so you can't talk about any of it. Even though Starbucks is unclassified, you can't talk about any of this. He says that's what Arrow done to him, and he gets into that later as well to mention how even his own life story, which he talked about to Arrow, he was told would be classified, even though there was nothing to classify. That's the kind of bureaucracy you're living with here as a whistleblower trying to come forward. And I thought part 2 was fascinating, where he goes into some of the detail, and one of my favourite footballing terms is shithousery. That goes on from this point of view. Borland says he was working at BAE for an agency. He tells of some co-workers hearing about his sighting, and from that they started sharing bits of information with him. He says from where he worked, the finances that were in and out of there, the number of programs that were funneled through there, a number of people knew the reality of the UAP UFO situation. Says he felt he was a dead man if he spoke to anyone outside about things. Said going to Senate and Congress, he was shaking, he was terrified, just going to those official places to share his story. This is something Knapp and Corbell talk about with Dylan Borland, that he was kept in a purgatory, easy for me to say, type state, where he had a clearance, his top secret clearance, but he was told he couldn't go anywhere else to work. He had to stay in the job he was in. He said he was doing 16-hour days for $60,000 a year. He filled this in later that there was 3.5 years where he wasn't allowed to get another job, and I hope, given I'm summarising all of this, I've got it accurately, so apologies if any of these details are incorrect. They should be correct. He said the work was killing him. The work was insane. He talks about all the issues that when he did eventually get to leave, there were a whole load of things that happened around his clearance. He was getting messed about. He talks about within a few days of leaving the workplace where he wanted to leave, but they didn't want him to go. He drove his car, which was then totaled. He then ended up having that investigated by the police, who told him his brake line had been cut, and that was the only reason he wasn't being charged. I mean, you can put 2 and 2 together there to work out, did someone cut Dylan Borland's brake line because he left that position? Yeah. He says the folks who were speaking with him at the job were in fear of their own lives. Their houses were getting broken into. They were being intimidated. They had given Dylan enough information that if something happened to them, he could get the information out. Borland says he only came forward because he believes some of these colleagues' lives were under threat. Dylan Borland didn't come forward in 2025. That was just the public-facing aspect of him coming forward. This goes back 5, 6, 7 years now. Dylan Borland's been trying to do this, so that's a hell of a toll to undertake. He talks about a pretty harrowing time, including having to go to sessions to evaluate his mental capacity, where he would need to watch on-screen graphics, including young children, like Afghani children holding guns. He was then told to count backwards from 100 in sevens, so i.e. 100, 93, 86, etc. But if he got a number wrong, so instead of 86 he said 87, they would scream at him, they would blast air horns in his ear and make him go back to 100 and restart. Proper messing with you. And Knapp says, it sounds like they wanted you to kill yourself. Borland said, that's correct. Knapp says, it sounds like a continuation of something like the MK Ultra program. He added that during a medical evaluation, he was asked questions about his belief in God. Do you believe in ESP? Do you believe in remote viewing? Things like that he thought were really strange, but they said were all basic normal questions, which I don't think those sound normal. I'd encourage people to watch the interview, like I say, themselves. A little bit more still to go here, but the body language of Dylan Borland is very telling. Looking at his hands a lot. I like to think with the interviews I've done now over the years, even though I've got this kind of small screen in front of me, I like to look at the guests and kind of try and get a read on them, their body language, what they're doing, anything that looks like a fidget, or not telltale giveaways. For the love of God, I'm not a counterintelligence officer who would know these things, but just how the person's reacting to what we're talking about can say a lot. And I thought he seemed so nervous. He kept fidgeting with his hands, very similar to watching Matthew Brown speak. Borland says in October, November 2018, once he was out of that job, all the bad stuff had happened. He got a call from someone he can't name, who said that what had happened to him was wrong, but they would get his clearance and stuff fixed. He would need to go back to do what he was doing, and at a point down the line, he would need to make some decisions. He said he got a contract to sign around 3 months later that said for $40,000 a year, he was going to go out and work in Afghanistan doing security work, but not to worry about the pay or the job. He signed it and then got a notification sometime later to say, don't worry about the deployment or the salary. The job's not available, but you've got your clearance back. So clearly someone has helped him with a loophole to get around the system to get things back. Someone was looking out for him here. So it's really interesting for me here at this point. I was thinking, think differently about the legacy programs. It's not like the gates to Willy Wonka's chocolate factory being opened and he takes you inside and right in front of you is the chocolate river with all the Oompa Loompas and the candy machines and everything going off, and you can ask him all the questions. It's far more like layer upon layer upon layer. For me, if you've seen the movie Inception, going into dreams, all that kind of stuff, folks. Really great movie. I love it. Leonardo DiCaprio, Chris Nolan, all that lot. But the idea that you go into a dream within a dream within a dream within a dream, and things get more complex, more dangerous, more murky the further down the dreams you go. And I imagine that's a lot what the legacy programs are like. You're being exposed to different layers. You could probably work in a facility that houses alien biologics or parts of an alien spacecraft, in my opinion, and not know that it has it there because you work in a different floor, a different part of it. You know some top secret stuff goes on there. You might never know it's anything alien or non-human. I think that's far more likely how it works. You don't get to see the Oompa Loompas and the chocolate river. You get to play and you get to lick the wallpaper on the walls with the snozzberries, if you're lucky. Borland talks about seeing statements on internal servers and chat rooms copied out word for word by debunkers on X. So I've probably read that badly. Let me just double do that. Borland basically has said on those internal servers and chat rooms, people like Sarah Gam, people like Lenville Logan have spoken about, he would see certain people post certain things. He said he then saw on X or Twitter the same statements word for word, the same tone, the same inflections posted by people online. And he reckons that is just proof that I don't think we even need, but proof there's a direct line between the intelligence communities and the social media of the UFO community and other communities and all the kind of stuff going on around the world. Borland talks about in a meeting with an official, talking about things he'd been exposed to, and he said a 2-word program name that got an intense reaction from the individual indicated he was onto something he wasn't meant to be. You could speculate, is that the Immaculate Constellation Programme document? Who knows? But he doesn't mention, obviously, what the 2 words were. Borland says when he went to the Senate, they realised he knew important information and they were worried for him, given what he knew, and they asked if he felt in any danger. He said he wanted to go through Senate before Arrow as he didn't feel they were being completely honest or transparent. That's not uncommon, is it? Arrow seems to have a really, really poor reputation, especially going back a few years before John Kozlowski came in, who seems to have a far better reputation than Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick and those before. He says he spoke to a gentleman in the House side of things and ended up discussing a whole load of non-UFO stuff. Crimes such as sexual harassment, misappropriation of funds, all came up. After 3 weeks, he was told to go to Arrow. He said he went to them in March 2023 to give his testimony. He says one of the guys in Arrow was from the DOD, one was FBI. He said they were pleasant and said they came across shocked at the information that Borland was giving across to them. He says he didn't give them everything, but enough to know people are being affected and there are issues. Borland says once he spoke to the ICIG, he gives them information but felt they weren't there to help him. It was to find out how dangerous he was to the legacy programme is how things came across. He was deemed credible, not urgent, and told to leave this all behind, and everything he had told them now was up for executive review. He was to be quiet. And this is the stuff I'm getting at where he mentions he talked about his own growing up, his life story, some background, and they told him not to even talk about that going forward because it was being reviewed. And again, that's just tying things up in legalese and red tape. I'm going to play you now a clip from Weaponized Part 2 with Dylan Borland. It's about 3 minutes long. And this is a clip of Dylan himself talking about what he thinks the phenomenon is. I'll play that now.
I will give my opinion. This is my opinion knowing what I know for a fact, reading and coming into contact of information that I believe to be true, looking at history and looking at through my perspective. I think what we are dealing with is very, very, very old. I think old humans have written those down in religious stories. I think that it's quite clear that we have been influenced by something else. I think Arrow has been telling the American public the truth, and you have said this on Weaponized on my behalf, which is Arrow's statement, there is no scientific evidence of extraterrestrials, is 100% technically true. You have to have a control to have scientific proof, and extraterrestrial is a very exact statement and word with an exact definition, an entity of another planet. These things, whatever they are probably what are referred to as gods or demons or angels or jinn, or insert whatever cultural or religious perspective you have. There are probably also extraterrestrials. It's not a one-size-fits-all. And considering, humanity has the same stories across many cultures. A flood, crafts that are in the sky, things that are coming and helping humans. And I'm at an advantage and a disadvantage knowing certain information that relates very clearly to things that are around the world that are related to what I know. I don't think that's by pure coincidence or luck. I think that the people that are in these programs know the truth to this stuff, and they are looking at it through a lens of this is true, this is true, this is true. This has been here for 8,000 years. This has been here for 4,000 years. Oh, we dug up this at an archaeological dig in hypothetically Egypt. I mentioned it to you guys last night. Lakatsky in his statement about his faith and what it means to be human and the impact and nothing to fear. Lakatsky and I are both Catholics, but I want to be clear in that it's the idea of something greater than us that is here with us and can influence us. And Pasolka talks about this, and you get into consciousness, and all of these things are so correlated, and that's a problem with this subject. And that's why one of the things that I'm a huge proponent of going back to having our government be a part of this is you have to set a foundation. Because if you come out and you throw it all out there, people are going to laugh at you, they're going to call you crazy, they're going to do X, Y, and Z. Then you have to set a foundation, and I understand the UFO fanatics are not going to like this opinion, but this isn't for you. This is for the public. If you want disclosure, the public has to be a part of it. Hence why I'm here, is to hopefully get enough people outside of this subject agitated, upset, and come and say, no, we're done with this. My big picture idea is it's been here for a very long time. It goes by many names. It's many different things, and it has an influence on all of us.
So there you go, folks. Dylan Borland's thoughts on this phenomenon. Is it anything earth-shattering in terms of brand new information? No, and I don't think it ever really is. But what we've got here is someone that, if you, like I do, I believe Dylan Borland is telling the truth, or what he believes is the truth, then it's a very interesting way to find out what he thinks, and some of the information he's found out has helped shape that opinion along the way. Very intrigued to hear what you think on that. Borland at the end said he needs it. The crimes should be the thing that are disclosed immediately, but the rest needs to be done bit by bit, as everything at once to be disclosed would be far too much. Knapp says Congress' interest is sincere and they want to get to the bottom of this, but compared to the secret keepers, they are amateurs. So yeah, really interesting one for me, folks. That's a recap of Weaponized Part 1 and 2 with Dylan Borland. I'd love to know your thoughts on that. Comments below are a big help, and I'll do the awkward like and subscribe, folks. That would be a huge help to me if you could do that for me. It does make a big difference to the video if you're listening to this, watching it. Any reviews, all that kind of stuff really help move the podcast up and onwards. So thank you so much. Or you can just listen to me and completely ignore that. To hell with you. But no, thank you if you get the chance to do so. Another whistleblower story from the last week or so is from a gentleman called Jim Shell. Who is Jim Shell, I hear you ask? Well, he is a scientist with the Department of Defense Acquisition and Science and Technology. He's retired US Air Force officer. Current research emphasis on use of optical telescopes for monitoring orbital debris, as well as space policy implementation. Specialities: space domain awareness, space situational awareness, orbital debris, radiometry, optical systems, and polarimetric signatures and imaging. Interesting guy. Even if you're like me and don't understand all of what that says, you hear the word space coming up a lot. Debris, orbital debris. Here is, I'm going to read you page 1 of 3. I'm not going to read all 3 pages, folks, but I'll put the link in where you can go and kind of find this stuff out yourself. But what I'd like to do is just read you the first page of a 3-page kind of out of nowhere drop that Jim Shell popped forward. So it's called Time to Speak Up, Postured for Operational Surprise. So this is dated the 29th of September 2025. And page 1 reads, there is a security control system within the US national security space, fostering abuse and interfering with critical missions. While there is legitimacy to the security control system, leadership lacks awareness of the extent of the risk being incurred to missions vital to the US and the resulting abuse and collateral damage. For years, I have attempted via formal channels to bring light to this issue in a manner with the lowest possible OPSEC footprint. However, it is unfortunately now time to come forward publicly. Following are my allegations. A security control system is supplanting the direction and authority of the US Space Force and US Spacecom. And he puts at the end of each of these high confidence, medium confidence, etc. Okay? There is a direct unauthorised interference of the Space Domain Awareness Mission in violation of explicit official policy, high confidence. The system has demonstrated the potential to interfere with US Northcom's protection of the United States. Those attempting to highlight the critical issue were subject to accusations of being problematic and not following protocols. Attempts to bring forward the critical issue to leadership were obstructed, high confidence. I'm getting to the UFO stuff. Intelligence community insights into Russian and Chinese on-orbit activities have been hampered by the security system. High confidence. Unpublished security rules are being enforced. Guardians have been indicted and removed from duty, threatened with a court-martial, yet not provided an opportunity to provide their perspective, all the while their chain of command was never informed of the nature of the wrongdoing. This was accompanied by an investigative report with many factual inaccuracies. High confidence. Funds have been misappropriated. Medium confidence. There is a connection to unidentified anomalous phenomena activities. Medium confidence. There are 3 more pages of that. A lot of folks within that are looking at it thinking this reeks of some of the stuff that Matthew Brown was talking about, author of the Immaculate Constellation document. Really interesting background, really interesting CV for Mr. Jim Shell. And that one, like I say, just kind of dropped and came out of nowhere. But I thought that was interesting. I'll put the link in the description so folks can go and check that one out. Moving on, Three Eye Atlas. What to say on this one, folks? The story that still refuses to go away. Is it because it's caught the imagination? Is this because it's great for rumour, conjecture? Or is there something to this? Is there any chance this is truly a craft or object of non-human origin? I don't know. But it is exciting, and people online seem to think so as well. Enough so it's making mainstream news. Bill Maher, discussed it on his show, which led to a little UFO chat around that as well. As of today, I've seen lots of images online, many of them grainy. I mean, it's very far away, 255 million miles. And I've done a little digging for you here, because this is how I like things explained. That is 1,000 moons away, distance from the Earth to the moon, or 2.5 times the distance of the Earth to the sun. If you drove on a highway at 100 kilometres an hour, or 60 miles per hour, it would take you over 430 years to reach it. Or if you were made of light, then 21 minutes. That's how far away the object is. And look, it's an eyebrow raiser. It's getting some of the scientific community involved, which is interesting, especially some of the big scientific YouTube channels. I like to see them cover it. I'm hopeful it's something that we find out more about that keeps up the intrigue in the subject. I'm expecting as more data comes out, we do see it as an interesting comet or something. However, ideally we don't end up with a deep impact type scenario. There are some of the more scientific social media accounts saying they're expecting to see some more high-resolution images real soon. But as the Smiths famously said, how soon is now? We could be waiting a while on that one. What are your thoughts on it? Is this the sort of way you could see a disclosure scenario unfolding? We pick something up far away, it gets closer, we find out, oh, actually it's something metallic, it's something organic. I don't know. What do you think? Let me know in the comments below or get in touch via the contact form over at thatufopodcast.com/contact. Gary Nolan has done an interview over with Robert Fleischer of exomagazine.tv. I believe it's a German channel, folks, just from the name and the accents and the look. Gary Nolan, a couple of comments from there, really interesting stuff, said, if you talk to people within what is the so-called legacy program, the people who claim to be directly working on the craft, and I have spoken to them personally, they say, oh yeah, we know China and Russia have their own programs. The United States has many agreements with what are first called the Five Eyes nations. Those are the English-speaking nations, Canada, the UK, Australia, New Zealand. Those are the first level agreements, but then there are agreements with France and others. And also now very well understood that the United States has agreements where if something does come down, then they have permission to go in and retrieve it. I've believed that to be quite likely for some time as well. Many others have said so. That makes sense to me that the US is just the dad on this one, and the rest of us have the agreement that something comes down, shit, you come in and deal with this. You were the first guys to do this. You've got the lead on it. But hey-ho, we don't quite understand how their technologies work, said Gary Nolan. Again, in speaking with people on the legacy program, they say their technology is advanced to us as would be a cell phone to a Neanderthal or a Denisovan. Denisovan? You get the gist there, folks. So yeah, David Haith, who is wonderful over on X and summarising interviews and whatnot. David sends me quite a lot of tweets. I'm sure he does it other folks as well. And I don't often like or say thank you, but I do read every one of them. And some of the highlights from his were included within that as well. He cited the Virginia incident where the US sent a retrieval team to basically retrieve the object from Brazil, not steal it from Brazil, but it was under agreement to retrieve it and bring it back. Gary Nolan talks about that in the John Burroughs Rendlesham case, that I actually went out and collected that individual's blood for analysis. On AI, he comments that perhaps what here is in fact not necessarily living beings that sent it, but it's artificial intelligence acting as advanced scouts to watch what's going on Earth and what we might be up to. Because it's pretty clear that anything that's a million years ahead of us has a longer history view and realises that one day they're going to be our actual neighbours, so maybe we should get to know them. Interesting. I've got Gary on with me after the Saul Symposium event that happens later on this month. So look out for that one nearer the time. I've mentioned I am going to Saul. Thank you to all the wonderful folks who support the podcast. I've managed to pay for flights, accommodation, and my ticket to Saul. I plan on making some shows each day while I'm there. Of course, obeying any rules Saul have on actual content of the lectures being released and whatnot. But I'll have something out each day. Thank you so much. If there's anything particular you're listening to this or watching this you would like to see or hear from those events, please let me know. I'll be taking my MacBook and some recording equipment with me. Should be a great trip, and thank you to all of you who are allowing me to go to this, especially my wife, who is looking after the kids for the 4 or 5 days that I'm away. Speakers at the event include, if you've not seen, Jacques Vallée, Tim Gallaudet, Jacob Hakmizra, Carl Nell, Gary Nolan, Carl Zvozil, Dr. Diana Pasulka, Dr. Ia Whiteley, you're going to hear about a little later on this week with myself, and many, many more. If anyone fancies it, there are still tickets left for the Saul Symposium just outside of Milan at Lake Maggiore. Check it out. I'd love to see some folks there. And if you are going, some of you have been in touch already, let me know. It would be great to meet up. One of the crappier updates that's on the way is the Congressional UAP update. The Disclosure Act has fell by the wayside yet again. It is third time unlucky. So, on September 29th, the Senate Armed Services Committee Chairman Roger Wicker from Mississippi announced on the Senate floor that Senate Democrats still hadn't responded to what's called the Second Manager's Package, basically a list of bipartisan amendments both sides agree to include in the NDAA, which is the National Defense Authorization Act. Unfortunately, it's been confirmed that the Schumer-Rounds UAP Disclosure Act, the Schumer-Rounds Amendment, the UAP Disclosure Act, the UAPDA, whatever you want to call it, was not in that package. I think Danny Sheehan said as much with me the other week on the podcast. D. Dean Johnson has been reporting on this as well. That means it didn't have full support or agreement from the Republicans this time around. We don't know exactly what the sticking points were, and I'm trying to get all the politicalese with this right, folks. So Democrat, Republican, whoever's been mainly the issue on this one, I don't know. It sounds like it just wasn't getting in. But to add to that, the House of Representatives already passed its own version of the NDAA back on September 10th. That bill contained no UAP language, as we know. So as it stands, the UAP Disclosure Act will not become law as part of this year's defence bill. There are still a few smaller UAP-related provisions tucked into the Senate version of the NDAA, plus a couple mentioned in the committee report. For context, 2023, the Disclosure Act did make it into the Senate's version, but it was the heavily watered down and stripped out version. In 2024, it didn't even reach that stage. In 2025, the story has repeated itself. The bottom line, no major movement on the UAP Disclosure Act this year. Unless, so there is an unless, even though the act has failed, there is still a small window left. So in looking into this, when the House and Senate versions of the NDAA get merged in conference, there's always a chance for a late addition. If both sides agree, the Schumer-Rounds Disclosure Act could still slip back in, but the odds on that are pretty low. I think Eric Burleson's also talked about a separate amendment going in as a standalone bill. And even if the full act doesn't pass, smaller pieces of it, things like the UAP reporting rules or record keeping requirements could still survive, but we'll get to that in just a second around the record keeping. It's not dead, but it's very much stuck in limbo. And a further twist, because over in the States you love keeping things simple. You may know, or you will know if you're in the States, I imagine the government has shut down and has been for about 6 days now after Congress failed to pass new funding. I won't pretend to fully understand the whole government shutdown thing, but I know it's to do with money and funds. That puts the UAP Disclosure Act in even more of a bind. So with the shutdown, folks, if you're outside the States or if you're not in the know, Congress grinds to a halt. Committees, negotiations, drafting staff are sidelined or furloughed. There's no breathing room to resurrect or insert UAP provisions. I imagine the UAP side of things would fall right down the pecking order because everything's up in the air. Healthcare, all these different kind of budgets all become big talking points. The NDAA timeline is delayed. The conference committee may not even meet while the shutdown drags on, so any last minute insertions are probably even less likely. Agencies like AARO, NASA and others that do UAP research may see reporting freeze, their staff frozen, delayed investigations or cuts to operations to allow things to get through. Bottom line, the shutdown doesn't just slow things, it totally freezes any chance of this going through. So I imagine we're a no for the UAP Disclosure Act for a third year in a row. And it begs the question, is a fourth year even worth it? And I think that's something that in the coming weeks and months, as all this kind of shakes itself out, we'll see where things are at with people like Danny Sheehan and whatnot, and where they think this may go. Danny did mention that the UAP records deadline has come and gone just recently as well, from their newsletter. The fiscal year NDAA had set a deadline of October 20th, 2024 for the executive branch and agencies and departments to identify, collect and transfer all UFO records to the National Archives. Just before that deadline, they issued an extension which put it to September 30th, 2025, so just last week. That deadline has now come and gone. So what we can realistically expect. So unfortunately, the law lacks any enforcement mechanism and doesn't impose penalties for non-compliance. So a bit like your mum and dad giving you an empty threat, if you don't eat your dinner, you're not going out that night. But you know what? They can't stop you going out, and you still go out. Even with legislation in place, the system's riddled with carve-outs, exemptions, national security loopholes. It's very, very difficult to enforce. But this rather concerning picture isn't the complete one. Continued public pressure has been working in recent years. That is helping. Public pressure has helped. It's got folks involved. It's got legislation. It's got policymakers or legislators and policymakers and officials and staffers. It's got their eye on the UFO topic in a way that wasn't there before. So, yeah, more members of Congress who hear directly from constituents. If you're out in the United States, folks, it's your chance. From what I'm told, it's great emailing. It's great phoning. If you can write a letter, which I know is a big effort for folks these days, but if you can write a letter, that can go a long, long way as well. So yeah, emails, letters, and then phone calls sound like the best way to do this, folks, to really help organisations like the New Paradigm Institute and just keep any kind of public pressure on the UFO topic up to a substantial level as well. On that, the New Paradigm Institute's Global Disclosure Day comes back round 19th of October. Quick one, the programme this year includes 3 segments. The first one, a little UFO history, investigations, disinformation, recent breakthroughs. Segment 2, we'll talk about framing disclosure as a grassroots movement. Segment 3, a lot of names here, a panel moderated by Dr. Jim Garrison featuring Richard Dolan, Carl Nell, Danny Sheehan, Eric Burleson, Ross Coulthart, Anna Brady-Estevez, Reed Summers, Chris Bledsoe, Kristen Fisher and more, modelled on the UAP Records Review Board concept. So some big names involved in that one as well. Didn't ask me, yeah, but it must be the accent. Nah, some really good folks involved in that one there, folks. So looking forward to that. Anyways, that's enough for this one. Just enough time for me to let you know that this week, my interview that's already recorded that's going out is with the brilliant Dr. Ia Whiteley, who is a space and aviation psychologist. While we do talk UFOs, you may have heard a motorbike go past there in the shed, folks, sorry. We do talk UFOs. There is a lot around consciousness, psychology, telepathy. She talks about getting inside the minds of pilots and astronauts and the work they do. Ia was brilliant, and I hope I've done her wonderful knowledge and mind justice in that interview. A side note on that, folks, I had the interview with Samuel Chong on the Theoba prophecy the other week. Great feedback from that. A little different to maybe what I normally do, going a little more into the woo. So many folks said they enjoyed that, and I don't mind doing that every now and again. If you've got any guests you think, Andy doesn't normally go for this kind of show, but I would love to hear him speak to X, Y or Z, with my kind of skeptical hat on that I've got, then please drop me over some names, and maybe once a month I'll try and fit in one of those shows which is a little bit more outside of what maybe perhaps my comfort zone is perceived as. This week, on Tuesday the 7th of October, I'm interviewing Kai Dickens, creator of the Telepathy Tapes, ahead of its second season launching on the 15th of October. If you hear this before around 5 p.m. UK on the 7th of October, you can get in touch and ask me any questions and I can build them into my interview with Kai. And later in the week, Darcy Weir joins me to talk about his latest documentary. When you finish this podcast, if you leave a comment, leave a like, subscribe, go to Apple, Amazon, Spotify, however you listen, watch, or read the book, listen to the podcast, anything like that you think this might help Andy, I'd appreciate it. It makes a big difference. So yeah, that would be great. And I've got a couple of new items on the thatufopodcast.com store, including my new hoodie, just pretty simple, but it's pretty comfy, really liking the material, and some of the cool new t-shirts on there as well, including the Grey's Anatomy t-shirt, which is selling really well. So thank you to everyone supporting me, gives you something nice to wear, and gives me a little bit back to help keep the lights on and keep the podcast running. Anyway, folks, thank you so much for listening this far. Look forward to hearing from you all in the coming week, and I'll speak to you very, very soon.